Elevate your hatching egg shipping business with Beyond the Egg. Discover the art of premium packaging, master the details of shipping, and create an unforgettable experience for your customers. Enhance your reputation, build lasting trust, and set your business apart as the gold standard. Visit BeyondTheEgg.com to begin your journey to excellence.
Welcome, poultry nerds. We are back with the famous Dr. M at this point. We're going to have to give her like British MIA number. What is it? MI5?
MI6?
Numbers. Well,
That'll be fun.
She can be our 009.
009.
I mean, it has a ring to it.
Wait a minute. Wasn't there a Dr. M on 007? Like the receptionist or something?
I think so, yeah. There was a Dr. something.
Oh, we're just being silly.
But I think there is a Dr. M. I don't know.
No, we're going to have everybody look at it. Y'all look it up and get back to us so we don't have to look it up.
There you go.
That's your homework for today. So she is back today so we can learn all about worms and what to do with them and what not to do with them and all those good things. So welcome back. It's good to have you back again.
Thank you.
So she said it was cold out there at 68 degrees and it's like 27 here. So do you have worms at 27? Is worms an issue in cold weather?
Well, actually they are. And they preserve longer.
Well, that's not good.
You know, it's like all these disease-causing agents, they can be kept in suspension by the cold. So watch out for Dr. M.
How can you identify? I know there's several different types of worms. How do you know what the bird has before it's too late?
So usually what is done is they perform a fecal flotation test, and that is mixing the feces or poop with a solution. And you mix it for the solution, and the solution allows all the worm eggs to float to the surface. So you have to keep it timed because about 10 minutes is when you would get all the eggs on the surface of the liquid. And then you take that slide and you look at it under the microscope. And from the shape of these, we call them ovum or eggs, the worm eggs. By the shape of them, you can tell what kind of worms you've got. So common ones for poultry would be roundworms, tapeworms. You have cecal worms, all different types of worms.
Where do you get a fecal done?
You can get a fecal done at your local vet hospital, or you could go to a diagnostic lab.
Could you learn to do it yourself?
Not unless you learn how to identify all the different worm eggs.
Okay, that's good.
And to distinguish them from pollen or something like that.
I was going to say, you can actually order the liquid that you suspend it with on Amazon. And if you have a microscope that you can hook a camera up to, you can take a picture of it, and you can use Google Images to really narrow your search down.
Hey.
But I will say, it's just like using AI. It's not always right. And until you learn specifically what those worms look like in your bird's poop, if you think your bird's sick, you need to get it checked out by a pro. If I was just myself and I was checking my birds, I would probably do the fecal float. And if I saw something floating, I would get some fresh and take it to a vet or a lab or somewhere and have it checked by a pro.
Some load is normal, right? No?
No. But when you do a fecal float, these are so microscopic. Those eggs you wouldn't be able to see. And then plus, like you said, we have to have a light microscope. That's easy going to be over $2,000.
Hey, I didn't say it would be cheap, but if you're going to be a poultry nerd, you need one.
Okay, so no.
Say like if you went to a state diagnostic lab, a lot of states have programs for backyard poultry owners, and sometimes it's more of a discount to
Oh,
be the
Yeah.
first choice. Because every state is trying to monitor diseases within its state. So states have it at a reduced cost. I mean, you can check with your state.
okay, so let's go back for just a minute. So no load is you don't want any load, worm load at all?
No, you don't, because these worms can build up over time, especially if treatment. I think what you're thinking about is another parasite called coccidia, where you want a little of
Yeah.
so that you build up immunity, but you don't want a whole bunch where then you'll start having diarrhea, bloody diarrhea. Foamy.
Gotcha.
That's for another parasite called coccidia, and the type of parasite is called protozoan.
Gotcha.
So worms usually belong to the class called nematode. So they're like circular. Then you have the cestodes, which are the tapeworms, and those are flat and in segments.
Okay.
Tapeworms require like an insect host, like a darkling beetle or like an ant that ingests the tapeworm eggs. And then when a bird eats that insect, then they usually get a tapeworm.
Okay, so if they're a healthy bird, though, do they expel the worm?
Well, so a bird that is born healthy and is just hatched and is kept in a clean environment, you will not have any worms at all. That's why when you get poultry from different sources and you're bringing on to your farm, you always want to have a quarantine period. And at that time, you do a fecal exam to make sure you don't have any worms. If you do, you treat them then, because once you bring it onto your main farm area, those worms, like the roundworms, last a long time. Some records are like 8 years in the soil because they have such a heavy-duty shell that they will survive in the environment. Cooler, better, but that's where a lot of the problems lie. You bring in some new bird, you don't know if they have worms, and then you have this. And if you keep them in a close enclosed areas, that builds up a lot of these worm eggs in the soil, so that when the birds peck on the ground or eating something on the ground, they might ingest these worm eggs, and then that worm eggs hatches this larvae, and it goes through the body, and then it, into adult form, and then it stays in the intestine, and it continues to shed eggs. And that's how you seed or contaminate your soil. So the worms are a numbers game. You're there, they're in the soil there longer. You can build up a lot of worms in your birds.
My question is, if you have free-ranging chickens, they're eventually going to come across eating worms. But is it possible for them to eat them but not get infested?
They have to eat the worm egg, so you can't see the worm eggs in the soil. See, every bird that has an adult worm in its intestines, that adult worm in the intestines is going to shed eggs. And those worm eggs or what we call as ovum or ova, those would be shed into the soil, and they'll stay in the soil. And then that's where the bird can ingest that when it has infective larvae. And then that cycle perpetuates in the bird. So if you had a free range, like a large area, the birds are going to be pooping all in that area. So the concentration is less if you have a bigger yard. But if I have a confined area and I've got birds that have worms and they keep on shedding this ovum into the soil, and the area is a small, let's say you got a 9 by 9 foot, and over time it's going to build up a lot of those worm eggs there. So your flocks that are consistently staying on that soil will get more exposure to worm eggs than one that has a large yard, because they're running all over. The birds are running all over the place. They're not in a concentrated area.
So is there anything that you can do to treat the ground to kill those?
I mean, you could do very harsh chemicals, but most people do not. So what you would, if you have a very high worm load, you should turn the 3 inches of soil over. And that way you reduce the exposure of worms, because getting a worm infection is a numbers game. The more you ingest, the more likely you'll have more worms.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's talk about all the different kinds. But we start with eggs for all the different kinds. They all start the same, right?
As their ovum. So you eat there, and in that egg is like the larvae, and they ingest, and then you have your worms developing in the intestines.
Okay, so there's a worm that is in their throat, a gapeworm. How common are gapeworms?
Gapeworms, you occasionally see it. So again, you probably see it more if you got a lot of birds with gapeworms in a confined area. So again, you can hear that confined area, more exposure, more worm eggs coming out, more birds pecking on the ground and ingesting them, and they get them. But of all the worms, I would say the most common that we find in chickens would be the roundworm, if people have worms.
And that's the one that looks like a big ball of spaghetti, right?
Yes. It looks like, let's say, gummy worms. But so they're circular, and they're all white, thin white.
Okay, that just killed gummy worms
Not
for me
spaghetti,
for a while.
it's smaller. It's smaller, thinner than, or smaller diameter than spaghetti. But when you treat it and you've got such a heavy worm, they could form a ball, and that's what causes the death of chickens, because you'll have a mass ball, like an impaction, because they all die at the same time and they're all adults. So they form like a ball of spaghetti.
But the bird actually dies of impaction, right?
If you've got a lot of worms in you. That's why they say that you have to watch out if you got big numbers like that, impaction, for the sudden death of all the birds. They'll form a mass in the intestines.
Okay.
I mean, hopefully nobody has that bad infection.
Hopefully.
But it can be if you don't take care of your bird.
That'd be a real bad infection.
Okay, what would be the second most common after roundworms?
Then I would say maybe tapeworms, which is a flattened worm that has a lot of little segments. And it's not that common, but occasionally you might find it. But if you look at the bird's poop, you will see these tiny little white, the size of a grain of rice. And they're the little segments of the tapeworm, and they move. So we often see these in our dog and cat.
Yep, I was just going to say I've seen that in a cat before.
They can move, those little segments.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what do you do if you notice these things?
Well, if you notice these things, then you should treat them. But you should know like how intense an infection that you have, because again, kill them all at the same time, they're all going to be balling up and you get your spaghetti ball.
So you want to kill them a little bit at a time?
Problem is you shouldn't get your infection that bad. And so you can tell how bad an infection you have by doing a fecal float, and then you can see how many worms, eggs that you have in that fecal sample that you have. Sometimes you might see the version like maybe 5 eggs per field, microscope field, or then you might have TNTC, too numerous to count. You have too numerous to count, that probably means you got a lot of adult worms in the intestines.
So is there a one med kills all worms, or do you have to get a specific dewormer?
Well, you could try one medicine, but when you treat worms, that's why you should always work a veterinarian, because there are approved use for worms. So let's say for laying hens, you have worms, you could use fenbendazole, but you must check the FARAD site, because that one, you need me to repeat that because I had those little bells.
It's FAARD, right?
FARAD. It's called FARAD. FARAD. So you look at FARAD and you look at Poultry, because this is a good site if you raise food animals to always look there, because it tells you what drugs are approved for use in food animals and the withdrawal times.
We'll put a link on the description below. Okay, so do some medicines have lifetime withdrawals?
That one would be, if you look at the site, different medicines have different withdrawal times. Withdrawal times means that your last treatment, you got to wait a certain number of days before you can eat the product. So that you would have to check for each different ones. And what is really important is that, okay, as veterinarians, we know that, and we keep track on the FARAD site to make sure that we do that for clients. So a drug might be approved now, but maybe a year from now it might not. So that's why you always have to take a look at that and be current. So
What would be some reasons why the drug you treated the bird with might not be safe to consume the eggs or meat?
There could be, when you treat with a drug, sometimes some of its chemical byproduct remains in the animal. So I'm going to give you another example, not on worms, but on medications, antibiotics, okay? So we need a withdrawal time, because if there's an antibiotic withdrawal time and you don't follow it, some of the antibiotic can remain in the product. And there are some people who are allergic to medications, and they get allergic, and sometimes it can be fatal. So that's why it's really important that you have, and a good example would be like sulfur drugs. Some people cannot take sulfur drugs and they get allergic. So there's been cases that I know of that people have eaten sulfur, the byproducts of sulfur, and they didn't know they were allergic, and then they had kidney failure. And I know that particular individual passed away. They don't know they take that. So that's why it's really good to look for the withdrawal times. And if the drug is not listed, you really can't do that, or the veterinarian has to be justified to use that.
It also kind of raises alarm bells for me, because people buy or trade adult animals and you kind of don't know their history a lot of times. And then you might take them home to eat them.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. It's a whole nother ball of worms. A can of worm.
Yeah. But that's for the medication. That's why the withdrawal time is really important. It doesn't, you might not think it does, but it really matters, because who knows who's allergic to what?
Yeah.
You don't know. Maybe there's some little byproduct of the drug drug being broken down, and then you don't know, like, oh my God, I'm allergic to fenbendazole. That's why we have the withdrawal times for safety, human safety.
So what
And
is
some
your
drugs don't have withdrawal, or they're not licensed to use. No withdrawal times. There have been no research on that, so they don't list a withdrawal time.
So now you're talking about off-label use, like using
Right.
goat dewormers.
So, you have to watch out for yourself.
So off-label
the
use,
risk. The what?
off-label use, like people would go to Tractor Supply and buy Safeguard for goats or cattle, and then try to do the math that way. What's your opinion of that?
You mean buy dewormers for sheep and goats and use them on poultry?
Yes.
That's your own risk. You're taking your own risk.
So that would be another year farm.
And sounds like people do it all the time.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that's the risk. Your own risk you take. No veterinarian would do that.
What do you think about routine deworming? Do you find that necessary? Like some people want to do it once a month or with the season or things like that. What do you think about that?
Well, initially, if you've got worms, you're going to probably treat them. The life cycle of the worm is approximately 2 weeks. So some people treat as often, trying to kill the adult so that there'll be no eggs. But if you don't clean the ground and those birds are still picking up the ova in the ground, or you're going to reinfection, you got to continue that forever. I would say that if you've got a new flock, before you even bring birds in, keep them in a quarantine zone, test them. And at that point, you treat them there. You keep them. If they got worms, you keep them for 2 or 3 weeks later, you treat them again. And you keep on doing it until they're negative. Because I'll tell you, if you got no worms, and you can have birds with no worms, it's cheaper for you. You don't have to deworm them, and you got a clean flock. It's only when you start introducing new birds in, that's how you can affect your entire flock. So if people got worms, try to treat them. And we know that if they're in cages, they're going to get less worms because they're not eating their poop. But then most people like to have the birds free. But if you have a lot of worms, then you got to turn the topsoil over, the top 3 inches, to just try and reduce the exposure of your birds to the worm eggs.
Okay, so I just want to kind of recap for 1 second just to make sure I'm understanding. So the birds can eat a worm. That's not a problem. It's when they're digging around and they get a hold of a worm egg is the problem.
Right.
So
because those eggs have to mature. Of course, when you eat a worm, there might be worm eggs in there, but those worm eggs have to mature to the correct stage where it becomes a...
Gotcha. All right, that makes sense.
But yeah. And usually the worms will stay in the intestines unless you got so many, then the adult worms may come out. And we all know that birds have that common opening called the cloaca. And that's where the end of the digestive tract meets the end of the urinary tract, meets the end of the reproductive tract. So sometimes when there's so many worms, those adult worms come out, and then they go back one of the openings, and they just happen to go into the reproductive tract. And that's how you can have eggs that have these little roundworms. Now, most times commercially, we have all those heavy duty, like candling lights that all the eggs pass through. And if you see something in the egg, take it out. And then those never get into commercial eggs that you see in the grocery store. But if you have your own farm and you have a heavy infection, if you don't candle them, you might just crack open an egg and you'll find the worm in the egg.
If it's
A little
that
extra
bad,
protein.
extra protein.
So instead of your bacon, maybe you got eggs and worm.
Oh, you're bad. If the infestation is that bad, is the bird treatable or would it be a hard cull?
You can try and treat them, but you would always say that if you treat them, if they have so many worms in the intestine, it could ball up and they could die, right? So you have to tell people the risk. If your infection is so bad, then there's always a possibility that all the worms will die at the same time when they get exposed to the drug, and they'll form a little big ball of impaction in the intestine.
Okay, so the preventative to worms is space and clean ground and clean surroundings.
Yeah. So, like let's say you keep your pastured poultry in cages, and let's say you got a lot of worms. It's great that you start moving your little tractor around so that you have different spots. But, you have to know your worm load, because if you contaminate all your soil, I mentioned that they live for a very long time given good conditions. So when you come back there, they might get that infection again. So I guess traditionally, if you got a lot of worms, you should turn that topsoil over. Just try to reduce the numbers.
Is this just
But the
chickens?
Turkeys have this. They have a different roundworm. The chicken roundworm is called Ascaridia galli. The turkey is Ascaridia dissimilis. So they have the same kind of round. So the other thing too that you can do, like you don't know, like Carrie had asked about, what? First of all, we would do the flotation. But let's say you don't have this microscope. How would you know you got worms or not? So what you could do is if you happen to have a bird die, you could always cut open the intestines and look for the worms yourself, right?
Mm.
The only time you might not find it is that it's an early infection. Within 2 weeks after they ingest the worm egg, you might not see adult worms yet. But if you had just any animal that died, whether you take it to the diagnostic lab or you're curious yourself, you should always open the intestine, because you'll learn a lot more whether you've got this problem. Okay, so first thing, birds die. Just know why they died. It could be normal mortality, but open up the intestines, and the best place to find worms is that if you go, you'll see their intestines, and you'll see like a duodenum, their pancreas, in the center of their duodenum. And then you come down to the other intestines, and that's called the jejunum. And if you look carefully along the jejunum, you'll see this little fleshy tag called Merkel's diverticulum. That's the remnant of the yolk sac. And if you find that little fleshy tag, and then the intestines, after Merkel's diverticulum comes the ileum, and then the 2 cecums. Okay? But find that Merkel's diverticulum, because if you've got worms, they seem to be located at that site first. I've always found worms there. Roundworms, tapeworms. So cut open that area, that Merkel diverticulum, and then you can see if you've got worms or not. Because some people don't want to cut open the whole intestine, so you will do that.
What about ducks? Do ducks get them too, waterfowl?
We don't really have too much of a problem. They can. They have probably their own worm, but much of a problem that I see for ducks. Ducks seem to have more viral diseases or bacterial.
And what about quail?
But like geese can have the tracheal worm, but they got a different genus. compared to chickens. And what did you say, quail?
Yeah, quail kept in cages up off the ground.
Off of the ground, less likely. The more your birds are off the ground, less likely worms.
Gotcha. All right. Can we touch on blackhead for just a minute on exactly what it is?
Yes. And that deals with the worm too. So blackworm, blackhead, also known as histomoniasis, is caused by a protozoan called Histomonas meleagrides. So this protozoan is very smart. It doesn't live long in the environment, but it can live longer in the environment if it's in the egg of a cecal worm. So cecal worm is a type of worm that is found in the cecum of birds, and the worm's name is called heterachus. And so this heterachus, who is located in the cecum, if you have histomonas, also is located in the cecum of chickens and turkeys. And the cecal worm ingests that, and this histomonas gets incorporated into the heterachus worm egg. So the heterachus is like an adult worm. It's shedding its ovum into the ground. That's how, and so there's a worm egg, and in it contains the protozoan histomonas. So when a chicken or turkey comes along and they eat it, that's how they perpetuate the infection. Now, the interesting thing you should know when you talk about histomoniasis, while chickens can carry histomonas, they don't show much. It's rare that they show clinical signs. But if you have chickens mixed with your turkeys or pheasants or peafowl or quail, those chickens who are not affected by the histomonas usually can give that infection. And those other birds will show signs of histomonas. And those birds will, they say that they have sulfur color dropping, that's yellow color droppings, and then they just die suddenly. When you open those birds up, the liver has crater-like lesions in the liver. So it's like depressed circular areas, like a little volcano. And then their cecum, those two blind ends, will be filled of this hardened pus. And we call that cecal cores. Okay? Because birds have hard pus, liquid pus like mammals. And so that is histomoniasis. Now, histomoniasis, like I said, is very smart. It can survive in the environment inside the worm, the ovum or the worm egg of the cecal worm, heterachus. But histomonas is also smart because earthworms that come along eat the cecal worm in the soil, and they can also cause histomoniasis. If our turkeys, peafowl, pheasants, quail eat the earthworm, then they can get that. The earthworm is ingested, the cecal worm comes out and goes to the cecum, and then you got disease going in there with histomonas. So histomonas is a very complex parasite. It can have indirect host, which is the cecal worm host. It can have the earthworm as a transport host, transporting it in the environment. And it can also spread, like in turkeys, through direct ingestion. If an infected bird just makes a poop and then the turkey eats near there, they can get direct ingestion, or by this process called cloaca drinking. Their cloaca kind of everts on the ground where there's a poop, and then the protozoan parasite goes. Now, so that's, in a little nutshell, is histomoniasis.
Is 100% fatal in turkeys?
It usually is. And you don't really have any early signs. They just die suddenly.
Do wild birds carry all of these things too?
Wild birds can have their own worms. They have worms. They might have worm gizzard, different types of worms. The one that we see in poultry.
Okay, so wild birds flying over are not really an issue with worms. Gotcha.
Or like mites.
Gotcha.
We're having a parasitic day.
We are. I think you have answered all of our questions. Okay, well, there's one more. So is there any natural remedies you can do to help prevent worm loads?
I'm going to say, like, to prevent your worm loads is quarantine and inspecting your birds before you put it on the farm. It's the best thing that you can do and keep your farm healthy. There are some people that, and I don't know of any scientific evidence to prove that, but those that are trying to raise their birds organically, they use a diatomaceous earth, and hopefully that the diatomaceous earth kind of break the parasite.
What about pumpkins and squashes?
I'm not sure of that. I know that some people have used, but I'm eating a lot of pumpkin pie. I mean, I'm sure we all are.
I think you have answered all of our questions. We will put the website to the medications in the description and on our website too.
I mean, I wouldn't treat it unless you, at your own risk, unless you were a veterinarian.
That's fair. All right. Well, we appreciate you being here, 009.
Yeah, somebody's got to look up.
Yes. Yeah, we'll find out before you come back next time.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Have some pumpkin pie. And
Thank you for joining us this week. Before you go, be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you can receive new episodes right when they are released. And they're released every week. Feel free to email us at poultrynerds@gmail.com to share your thoughts about the show. Until next time, Poultry Pals, keep clucking, keep learning, and keep it exciting. This is Carey signing off from Poultry Nerds. Feathers up, everyone.